I was doing all this random stuff. And actually what kept happening, the Dockyard kept getting like people querying my website and people calling me and going, can I actually have this thing, please? And I'm like, oh, I'm not that excited about that. I'm just like, I hated being a lawyer. And what I actually realized was that I was tripping over product market fit very early on because I was getting drawn towards it. And that's another thing. Like if people are grabbing you by the hair and asking you, can you please charge me for this thing? Then you probably should follow that rabbit down the rabbit hole. I reckon anti-sales is the new sales, which is challenge people to say, well, why do you need my thing? Because if you can't talk someone out of buying, then you know you're in the chute for product market fit. Instead of trying to talk people into buying, almost challenge them to say, well, but do you really need this though? Like it sounds like using an Excel spreadsheet's fine. And that this would just be slightly better than an Excel spreadsheet. And if I was founding a business today and I was the founder, I would be having those conversations off from day zero, because you'll find out super quick that maybe you shouldn't waste your time. It was an opportunity for me as an executive to be no longer required, and I stepped away from the business. So yeah, that was how it happened. It was
what a journey.
After I told that full story, and even just sort of telling it out loud, it's like, oh God, it was actually more traumatic than I realized.
Stuart, so good to have you join us. I found this line online that says, I founded the Dockyard in 2016, listed it on the ASX in 2020, and then acquired Ansarada via a merger also in 2020 to bring together the two best deal tech companies on the earth. That's sort of a bit of a line in the sand. Could we maybe go back, like where did that all start? And then we'll jump from 2020 onwards. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that sounds all right. And it's not often that you hear yourself quoted and think, yeah, that still stands up. I'll stand by all of that. I don't feel embarrassed or too embarrassed to play it. I think that all still sounds pretty legit. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Don and Aaron. I've been following what you guys do at Tribe for many years, well before you even probably knew who I was, because I was admiring what you were doing from the background as a business-to-business software as a service guy. I think when I started the Dockyard, which was the original business, which then changed its name to Ansarada when Sam and I brought his business and my business together, which we'll get to, because the Ansarada brand had a much bigger profile over in the major markets in North America and Europe than my business had got to at that point. So it made sense. That was sort of the rationale there of making it simpler for our customers. The story starts, I guess, with me as a lawyer. I was a corporate lawyer doing mergers and acquisitions, a little bit of like corporate financy type stuff, mainly sort of private and unlisted stuff. I never did big, fancy listed sort of financing stuff. That was too complicated for me. I always sort of thought that I was probably perfectly designed if I was going to be a lawyer to be an M&A lawyer, because most of M&A really was just sort of glorified project management until you get into the complicated stuff, which I never did. I never did the sort of like public M&A, which, there's definitely a lot more things to take into account. So any lawyers listening, don't take offense. But my experience of what I would call mid-market M&A was that it was a lot of sort of project management. And it was good because I was probably only successful as a lawyer because it turned out that I was actually just a sales guy. And most people in professional services think that the word sales is a dirty, disgusting word, and you partners of professional services firm don't sell, they add value. But the reality is it turned out that I was just super interested always in my clients. And I used to always have blowouts on all of my fee estimates because guys like you two actually would come in as business owners and I'd be sitting down going, oh, this is really cool. Like, tell me about your business. Like, how do you make money? And I didn't realize I was asking things like, what is your business model? What is your revenue model? What are your margins? What are your cultural issues? But I was just interested, and it took me about 12 or 13 years as a lawyer to figure out that I was actually trying to be on the other side of the table. I was trying to be the guy who ran a business, not a guy who advised someone who ran a business. But as I think most good, I won't say great because I'm not trying to say I'm great. I'm just saying most good or great B2B SaaS businesses come from a subject matter expert who is just been physically feeling a problem and a pain to a certain degree that it gets unbearable and you think, shag this, I'm going to go and solve this. And that was what happened with me. I was sitting on the floor of the boardroom of the law firm that I was a partner at in Sydney. And I had a senior associate there with me. It was 2 or 3 in the morning. We had a closing for probably the biggest transaction I'd ever worked on, certainly. There's thousands of documents. And I'm not kidding. We had to get some of the, what do they call them? Like the office, the guys sort of do all of the helpful stuff around your office. They kind of, jack of all trades. We had to get them to move all of the boardroom furniture out, like all the big tables and chairs and stuff, so that we had this big space. And we're on the carpet, and I'm there like shoes and socks off at 3 in the morning, sticking Post-it notes to all of these closing documents. And they were like, we constructed some coding system that was, AA-113, AA-whatever it was. There's literally thousands of these documents. And I'm like, I actually sat against the wall at one point, and I actually just started laughing. I said, can you imagine if our clients saw us right now? They would not be happy about how much our hourly rates are. And we are on our hands and knees putting Post-it notes on documents. And that was the moment the Dockyard was born. And because I was like, this is bananas, that this is how a corporate transaction is closed. And so the original name, actually not many people probably know this, the original name of the Dockyard was called Closing Rooms, because all I was trying to do was, and the rooms was linked to data rooms, which will create a nice link for later with Sam and his business at Ansarada. And I was just like, the world doesn't need another data room. There's heaps of good ones, and Ansarada was absolutely regarded as the nicest, user interface and the best one on the market. And they were third out of what was called the big 3, and there's lots of other players. So I never was out starting a data room at all, because I thought that was already a very well served area. And actually, another funny story was that during the acquisition of the Ansarada business, obviously we were doing our due diligence, and we went through their Salesforce records, and I found the contact profile for me, because I was a customer of Ansarada as a lawyer, and okay. And I was like super curious. I'm like, I wonder what notes have been written about me in there. Luckily, I must have been a pretty easy customer. There was no snarky comments in there from customer success or support about this guy.
Or somebody was smart enough to clean out the truth before you went in there.
Yeah, we would like to think that, but we all know here, and anyone that's ever been involved in any form of business, that no one's ever that organized. So
that is true.
You tell yourself that, Stuart. Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
And so I then was like, developed the first version of the platform. So I'm, as anyone who's listening could tell, me lawyer, not a software developer. So spent pretty much most of our savings on version 1, which I outsourced the development to. But yeah, got the first version up and running, and then that was really when I started figuring out, I have no idea what I'm doing. Why on earth did I start this? Holy moly! It turns out that building software is super hard, and then selling it's even harder. And I've decided to try and sell to the least friendly customer segment you can almost imagine, which is lawyers or legal services, because that was our focus at that time. And yeah, I guess the best part of 12, 13 years later, I got spat out the other end of the journey, much wiser, much more grey hair, but luckily, sort of surviving the lion's den. But yeah, that's it started as me as a lawyer sitting on the ground with my shoes and socks off.
I think we often talk about founder problem fit, and when we're evaluating a deal, it's like, what does this individual or this team, like, what experience have they got that have led them to this insight? And like I think what you just described there is an actual poster child for it. What was the pushback? You had an industry doing things a certain way, and in my experience, not only that, there's an incentive there because you are getting billed out, so the firm wouldn't want to see those dollars go. What pushback did you have to get over during the early stage of getting these up to get customers who are used to doing it a certain way?
Yeah, I think the answer to that ultimately is the easily top 3 lessons I learned from the whole thing, which was, and I made the error, by the way, which is why it's burnt in here. I created a solution to a problem. That's correct. There was a problem and I created a good solution to it. That both of those things are true so far. But what I didn't realize I was doing, and the mistake that I was making, and I persisted with it, I was asking my target customer to spend money on something that they previously weren't spending money on. And now that I've I spend more time, I guess, advising founders, investing in startups, that kind of fun stuff. Nearly the first question I ask now is, hey, does someone, the problem you're solving, do your target customers already spend money on that thing? And if the answer is no, that's a take 2 steps back for me. If the answer is yes, I then take 2 steps forward. So yes, my target customers were doing something badly and inefficiently. I don't think I properly thought through the incentives for them to change. Because actually, in one way, lawyers charge by the hour. So the more inefficient they are, the better. I mean, the richest lawyer is the slowest lawyer, is the saying. And so I actually was challenging their economic model, which disincentivized them from actually wanting to be more efficient, which, then also straight away, I didn't realize I was walking headlong into these issues. And straight away, I was already walking on pretty steep terrain when it came to trying to sell. And the other thing, and then a spin-off, which is also in the top 3 things I learned, I'm getting them all out early, is I also fell into the trap of reacting to the oohs and ahs in my meetings when I showed the technology to lawyers. And 100% of the time, every time I showed our tech to, this is the Dockyard, the closing platform, the workflow and automation around closing and project management on a deal, people would be like, this is brilliant. This is exactly what we need. It's so stupid the way we do it. Oh, it's great. You've actually built the perfect solution because you were also one of us. I mistook that for then it would just start flying off the shelf. Like, how could you say that to me in a meeting, but then not buy? But it turns out that those things do not correlate. And a mentor and early investor of mine, actually, I think he was getting annoyed with me at traction around revenue, which is, I think, standard operating procedure for early investors. And he eventually just sort of bullied his way into a couple of sales meetings. And he gets off them. We did 2 or 3 in a row, like one morning. And then he got off and he was like, I thought you were going to invite me to sales meetings. And I'm thinking, he's gaslighting me. I don't know what he's doing. Like, we literally just had 3 sales meetings. Like, and he's a bit of a cryptic dude. So I'm always like, and I was like, mate, I won't use his name. Because I was like, I'm already stressed enough. I can't be dealing with this cryptic stuff. He goes, you're doing demonstrations of your software. You're not doing a sales meeting. I'm like, how is that how are they different? And it turns out that once you get your head around it, they are super different. And I was doing product demos and I was showing my product, which was a great solution to people who wanted it to be better. And that was nice, but I wasn't actually selling. I wasn't identifying the buyer properly. So I was, showing associates who lived the pain, but they weren't the buyers.
And did you connect with that immediately and you had that openness? Was there like pushback in hindsight? It can be sometimes hard for people to engage with some of that feedback. How did you handle it at the time? And in hindsight, was there a better way to do it?
Well, I actually think it's probably one of the moments I did handle something quite well, because I mean, I was so desperate to try and make it work and things weren't working. You're pulling your hair out like, why are our sales not look like a rocket ship? And then you also have all of that, I guess the startup ecosystem BS cloud maybe is the best way to describe it, where, you're sort of trying to compare yourself stupidly to Silicon Valley, as it turned out, when you think Silicon Valley consumer startups, like whether the classic example, oh, we're not a Facebook, we're not a Google, we're not a this. Because I said right at the start, I've been following Tribe for years because I love what you guys do, and specifically around, and I said business to business software as a service companies. I didn't even know what B2B SaaS was when I started a B2B SaaS company. I started one and I'd never heard of that phrase before. And it turned out, I'm like, oh, because one day I'm like, I think we're a B2B SaaS company. And so it was like, yeah, you're definitely a B2B SaaS company, mate. Like, what did you think you were doing? So I was so far behind the 8 ball in terms of understanding that I really was under a lot of pressure. So any sort of advice I grabbed with both hands. Now, sometimes, people gave me advice that I grabbed with both hands and it turned out to be really not great for us. Like, it was an enormous waste of time, enormous waste of money, terrible direction. And I mean, that's one of the things now with me with mentoring founders is counseling them to slow down, and think super carefully about decisions that you make in the business, because I felt like I was way too skittish because I was so desperate to get it to work. And I didn't realize that you can't compare a B2B SaaS business to some sort of consumer startup, because the grind is way more real in B2B SaaS. I think the value creation ultimately, if you can make it work, is exceptional. But I think one of the things that really saved me from probably throwing it all in was and you guys might even know it, I found on YouTube this presentation this female founder had done, and she was talking, and I don't know, it was like a TEDx type thing, and she was talking about that she's just done a down round, and it wasn't meant to be, but it was almost like a stand-up comedy skit, the way that she was talking. And she was just like, if you want to,
that sounds up our alley.
yeah. Well, she was like, if you want to hit the, I won't be quoting her properly because I watched it years ago, but essentially she was saying, if you want to hit the bottom of the barrel of desperation, go try out a down round and try and deal with your original investors and see how that goes. And she then brought this graph up, which she called something along the lines of the long, slow B2B SaaS revenue chart. No,
you're talking about Gail Goodman. You're talking about Gail Goodman. It's the long, slow SaaS ramp of death.
Yes, that's it.
It's Gail Goodman, and she was the CEO of Constant Contact. I have watched that 50 times, and I've shoved it down the throat.
Yes.
I'll put the link. It's Gail Goodman, Constant Contact, the long, slow SaaS ramp of death.
Bullseye, Don, because I think if I had never watched that, I may have thrown in the towel. So if by some radical miracle Gail ever listens to this, thank you, Gail, because if I hadn't have watched that YouTube clip of that talk that she did, I think I would have broken and never have continued.
Can I share the opposite? Can I share the opposite? Because of that video in a company that I was a significant investor in with a family member, it kept me in when I should have thrown in the towel.
Different outcome.
I look forward to comparing notes, but yours came from you had a founder problem fit that already we were coming at a market and had our heads up our ass, and we didn't know our asses from our elbows. So yeah, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, but Gail's talk essentially validated where I was at. I was like, okay, so I'm not just a complete loser who doesn't know what they're doing with a shit business. There may be elements of truth in each of those things, but I really thought, okay, this is not for me. I must be doing something so wrong. And it was the first time in my life, probably from a sort of academic and economic undertaking perspective, that I truly felt like something just wasn't working. Like, stuff had always worked well for me, went to school, did well at school, go to uni, do fine at uni, get out of uni, get job at law firm, do well at lawyer, become partner early. It's sort of like you kind of get a bit used to, you can do stuff. It doesn't happen without effort and aptitude. But this, I was like at a loss. I'm like, I literally do not understand how none of this is working. And I've tried everything that I could possibly do. And once I then understood a little bit better about how B2B SaaS businesses, and obviously once I knew what they were and that I had one, I thought I'd better go learn a bit more. So I was researching, listening to more people, podcasts, reading the odd book. Like The Mum Test was the best book I ever read. That one, like, I'm not huge, like I don't have a massive library of sort of all the startup guru books, but The Mum Test certainly was really impactful for me. That's one that I do recommend. Because, and that links to the whole, are you doing product demos or are you doing sales meetings? And you're also, what kind of questions are you asking? And we all naturally ask really terrible questions, particularly as founders, because you want people to tell you your baby's beautiful when maybe your baby's ugly. And so then what I then found was that we did a slight product strategy pivot in reaction to the slow sales cycles, but I also better understood the economic buyer. So I started moving further up the food chain, and I started constructing sales meetings with a degree of science, having set questions that we repeated all the time, being super strict on that. So you at least could get patterns so that I wasn't in every sales meeting, but after we started to grow a little bit. But look, yeah, we sort of brute forced product market fit in the end. And and then everything changed in 2020 with COVID and the listing and the Ansarada transaction, which took us on a slightly different direction. But from start through to 2020, that first 4 years when we were specifically solving that workflow automation inefficiency issues on transactions, we did start to make it work, so much so that we got a small IPO away. But the threshold to get to that is you've got to be going at least fairly okay. We were making money, we were growing really well, we were really starting to zoom, and it was probably at the start of our okay, we can really take this to the next level. But it was horribly difficult that first 4 or 5 years. And there's multiple points where I probably reasonably should have gone, I don't think this is going to work. Obviously, ultimately glad I just was so bloody minded that I just stuck with it. But yeah, I still think I'm still reflecting on the things that I've learned, to be honest, because I'm only 1 year out of the business, so it's still pretty fresh, the exit.
I think success, though, is it's really hard to genuinely attribute causality, to go back and understand all the ingredients that were necessary. But those two big lessons learned that you shared, I think are it's a common thing we see in founders, right? Learning the non-concentric circles of what customers think, say, and do, and they can give you all the great gesturing, but when it comes time to sign the check. But I think that second piece around unlocking the difference of a product demo versus an actual sales, and we see founders fall into that trap, particularly technical founders, the product will sell itself. I'm kind of keen though, that pivotal moment you've had where you transition to really systemic sales and using data to drive those decisions. What were some of those early strategies you used, and what was the best lead gen techniques that you actually came up with? Talk through that pivot and how you then went about sales.
Yeah, so these are awesome. These are some of my favorite topics because as a non-technical founder, I essentially was chief sales guy. And to be honest, I don't think I was ever not really either chief sales guy, whether in title or not. Essentially, you're always chief sales guy when you're a non-technical founder, or certainly should be. So go to market. So that's the marketing and the sales bit was definitely where I spent most of my time. Product strategy, I spent a lot of time because I knew the problem really well, but obviously technical and development, I then had great technical people and two exceptional CTOs on the journey, which again, those guys, you talk about causality, they've saved my bacon probably more times than I would even recognize. And I never even knew about stuff. But back to the actual question, Aaron. So techniques. So sales really stressed me, and it almost, I struggle to think of a time when I wasn't just stressed about sales. How do we be better at it? Are we crap at it? Why are other people seemingly better at it than us? How hard can it be? Oh, it turns out hard. And just this, it's the way I describe it, it's like wrestling a muddy pig, right? You never really have a good grip on it. And I think part of it, well, for me anyway, I felt like getting comfortable with it.
I didn't think you'd been to a tribe offsite.
Yeah, wrestling a muddy pig. It's a good analogy too.
Yeah, well, me getting comfortable with the fact that you never really probably have a good grasp on it was just helpful from a mental health perspective, because you drive yourself crazy, right? Going, why aren't we getting more marketing qualified leads, and why aren't they turning into sales qualified leads? And you work through your funnel. And again, some of the, in desperation, you then go, oh, go and outsource it to a lead generation joint in the Philippines. They'll miraculously create highly qualified, high quality leads for you that you seemingly can't do. And it's just, it's always a disaster. I mean, people will still keep falling for it, but yeah. I did.
Did you fall into the trap of also hiring experienced salespeople to take it off your plate, even though you hadn't worked out the actual sales funnel?
Exactly. Because again, you're so desperate to solve the problem, you'll be very attracted to people who confidently sell to you that they can solve the problem. And I fell for that heaps of times. I've probably ticked every box on the checklist of stupid things founders do on that front. And I was more a sales-oriented founder as well. So I think a technical founder it's even harder for them. And so that's, again, ultimately figured out that if I can't figure out how to sell this, no one's going to be able to figure out how to sell this. Well, not no one, but almost no one, right? And you then try and start scaling stuff, which is just well before it should even, maybe not even should be done at all, let alone scaled. So I then a breakthrough for me, which hopefully helps someone listening, is I actually just went back to super basics. And I'm like, look, selling is simply having a conversation with the human that needs the thing you've built. That's the way I think of sales, really. And the more honest and authentic that conversation is, the more likely it is that they buy, and probably the more healthier that relationship is in terms of lifetime value of that customer. And I don't mean that in the sort of unit economics sense. I mean that in the general sense of they're a good customer. They're an advocate. They introduce other customers to you because they're an advocate. They pay their bills all the time, and they take up 0.05% of your customer support and customer success team's time, right? All of the additional costs that people often don't think about of having good quality, well-fitted customers. And so I sat there and went, I was in like a sales strategy meeting, and everyone's throwing around, oh, we could do, this is pre-agentic AI. We could get this agency in, and they essentially have just got humans that pretend they're you on your LinkedIn profile. Remember all that stuff? And they just send out. The only reason I know you can't do. Yeah.
Spam out the messages.
Right. And the only reason I know that you can't do more than 40 connection requests in a day is because I learned that at that point. You hit 40 and then LinkedIn stops you.
Yeah.
And it was 40 back then. I don't know if it's still 40. And so, everyone's like, yeah, we'll do that. We'll just spray and all this stuff. And I just went, hang on a second, guys. Who are our customers? Oh, yeah, they're lawyers and investment bankers and corporate finance accountants, but they're kind of like investment bankers that work in a big four. So I'm like, cool. I said, what do they wear? Yeah, they wear suits. Okay. And where do they all work? And our offices were in the city, and I'm like, all of these big, tall, shiny things. That's where they are. What time do they come to work? Between 8 and 9 in the morning. Yes, correct. What's the first thing they do in the morning? And then lots of different things. I'm like, no, they get a coffee. I said, let's go and stand in the foyers of these buildings and buy people coffees, because our customers, it's like a fishing net. They literally have to come through us to get to their office. So I sort of got back to super basics. The best tactic that in the history of the business that ever worked was going to a cafe in the foyer of a building where we would have 5 customers. It might be 3 law firms and 2 accounting firms that had corporate finance teams were in the one building. And that's useful. You can be like, thanks guys, you've actually accumulated in the one geolocation for us. We'd go to the cafe in the morning, like super early, and pre-buy $500 worth of coffee and just get little cards, and you chuck $50 to the barista to get it across the line. And then you'd stand there and they'd have our branding on, and you'd be like, good morning. Coffee on the dockyard this morning. Good morning, coffee on the dockyard. And because obviously on the back it would have a little one liner or something nice as in terms of a catch. And of course, obviously we would be giving free coffees to some randoms that weren't in our ICP. That, Aaron, was the number one sales tactic ever. And every time we'd then stop doing it and we'd get on to try and do fancier things. And there'd be, of course, sales is ultimately doing a whole bunch of things relatively well, is kind of been my experience, because no one's going to sit there and say there's one thing that's going to work for you. So like we're doing that. You've got to have your SEO, you've got to have your digital marketing, your Google, ad buying has to be not retarded. You have to be doing some events. There's like the laundry list of tactical things you can do. You kind of got to be doing a fair bit of it fairly well. That cumulatively equals a decent go-to-market strategy. And I deliberately didn't say an excellent or an exceptional, because I think excellent and exceptional go-to-market strategies are honed over, I think, decades, not years. So someone could go and find a business that got to exceptional in 2 years. Okay, but that's a freak, right? Like that's a right out on the end of the bell curve. If you're in the middle of the bell curve, which is, I would be maybe generous to say I was in the middle of the bell curve, or maybe it was on the dumber side of the bell, but we worked hard and we brute forced a lot of things, which got us there, which is also a bit of a values, perseverance kind of thing, lesson in that. But whenever we got too fancy with our sales stuff, it'd just start to fall apart again, and then we'd go back to basics. And it's super interesting, and you guys would have thought about this way more than me, actually. But today, as in this day and age, agentic AI, the ability to proliferate outbound, it makes me wonder what's going to happen to go to market. And do we, in some sort of, one of my theories is that in a weird way, we end up full circle back at
100%.
physical, authentic,
Yeah.
old school
Humans
sales.
buying your coffee.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mentioned to a founder about selling software via door-to-door sales, like literally going and meeting hotel managers on site.
Love it.
But to a founder who's established in the last 5 years post-COVID, it's such an like what you actually physically met face-to-face on a cold lead. It's like, yes.
You actually go
That was
out
how we
and
sold.
you experience potential rejection.
But you read all the body language and all these other signals that you get. And I think to your point, Stuart, I think you're spot on. I agree. I think we'll come full circle, and the value of human interaction and that commitment to meet someone face to face in their location, I think will be highly valued.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, there's a million different sales, what do they call them? It's like Manic and Bant and Challenger. What are those things called? Sales formulas or sales sort of
Like a
processes or
methodology
systems.
type.
Methodology.
Yeah.
Thanks, I was struggling to find the word. They're sales methodologies, and everyone, anyone in sales generally has their favorite. They all kind of cross over each other because, broadly speaking, the Bant one's my favorite because it's the simplest. I understand. Someone could prove me wrong. I understand that it dates back to the old IBM sales team in the 70s. Like, it's super old school, like budget, authority, need, and time. Medic and Challenger and all that kind of stuff. I just think built on that. The Challenger one was probably the one that we looked at and utilized, and I thought was favorite. And the reason it links, Aaron, to what you're saying is that Challenger is actually about helping and consulting with the customer and helping them understand their problem even better than you understand their problem, better than they do. So they see you as a consultative partner, and sitting down with someone and just and helping them solve problems in their business. I just don't think you can do that through 10,000 outbound messages a day. Like, you're not having genuine conversations. You're just spraying your messaging as wide as you can. And I think even then, even if you do through that spraying actually hit the right kind of people, it's such a light touch, shallow outreach that it doesn't engender a proper conversation which would otherwise lead to an actual sale. And the other thing on this bucket or topic is, I reckon anti-sales is the new sales, which is challenge people to say, well, why do you need my thing? Because if you can't talk someone out of buying, then you're in the chute for product market fit. But instead of trying to talk people into buying, almost challenge them to say, well, but do you really need this though? Like, it sounds like using an Excel spreadsheet's fine, and that this would just be slightly better than an Excel spreadsheet. And if I was founding a business today and I was the founder, I would be having those conversations off from day zero, because you'll find out super quick that maybe you shouldn't waste your time. But of course, what we naturally do is you go in there and go, I understand you do it with an Excel. That's a bit old school. This is Excel plus. How much better is that? And of course it is slightly better. And people will tell you it's better because it actually is better. That doesn't mean they'll stop using Excel. And that's that confluence of product market fit as a topic, demos and not sales meetings, mum test, asking dumb, biased questions to seek the answers that you actually really desire because of your ego, as opposed to understanding what the market really will do in terms of the behavior. And the behavior being, you want these people to buy. And that behavior, it turns out quite difficult to get a catalyst behind. So the physical stuff. But if you think about then, because of AI, and there's a million people talking about this now correctly, I believe, I think the barrier to starting a business today, or a startup, if you want to call it that, is, if it's not zero, it's so close to zero, it's not funny, really. Like, if you've got half a fire lit under your ass, you could start a tech company relatively easily, very little need for the kind of capital that you used to need, much lower need for humans, not zero, but certainly you can do it with less humans, which obviously correlates with less money needed from an investment perspective. So if you follow that logical thought through, you end up with the proliferation of startups. And I I'm not saying I coined the term, but I certainly have been using it for a while, where I'm like, we're going to see micro problems solved in business that weren't worth solving before. Because like if I came to you with a super niche problem in a super niche area, not like you guys as in Tribe, and I'm like, hey, I'm pre-rev, but I've got this amazing problem solution pitch for you. And you'd go, yeah, that's interesting, Stu. And you probably look like you're solving it great too. But there's only a tiny addressable market. So even if you had all of it, it's not really worth solving, right? Like it's just not a big enough bucket because of the cost of starting the business and getting it going. But now if the cost of starting the business is much lower, the threshold for the sort of size of an addressable market must come down in terms of making it attractive to attach. I think that then fuels the problem with go-to-market. You're going to have more and more noise and more ICPs being targeted for multiple problems that are on their desk, which is then going to make it even harder for them to have a conversation. Because I kind of think in the B2B world, we're going to have a proliferation of solution providers, but the same number of businesses, which is otherwise known as customers, right? And I'm like, those maths just don't stack up.
Yeah.
It's going to get so much noisier. And we're already seeing it with our portfolio.
Yeah, we see it with early stage founders. Like to your point of solving a problem that's really not a problem. And Vu Tran talks about this with his medical practice. Getting pitched all different types of communication platforms for GPs to replace the fax machine. That's not a problem for him. He's quite happy to hand the sheet of paper over to someone to send the fax for him, or go to the machine, type a few numbers. But I think the other part of that is also temporal problems. Like what we're seeing are solutions being created to solve a problem that actually won't exist in a few years' time because of other technological innovations or market shifting.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, So my sort of personal feeling at the moment is I think it's quite a scary time to be a founder and to start a business. It's certainly, therefore, probably a scary time to be an investor. Certainly if you're trying to enter the investment space now, it's very, how do you guys figure out what to back now? Because it kind of feels like all the rules have changed. And, did I exit in the golden age of B2B SaaS? Was I just lucky with my timing?
We think about this a lot, and it's a perpetual topic of conversation. And probably the biggest word that has most of us often discussed during looking at deals is durability. Like how will this business create durability that gives them pricing power and stickiness long term?
Yeah, and something like yours, that once it's embedded, like in the family office, we're doing a few transactions, out came the word Ansarada. It's now almost become a verb for that whole space. But when talking to the M&A guys and the lawyers, A, they don't pay for it. So who cares? Two, they've got it in their process, and they have disproportionate influence over customers who's never done this before. So it's not like a customer's going to go, oh, this is my favorite data room software. No. And so those are the kinds of things we're looking at. And then we're like, if AI keeps getting better and better, are we going to be excited or are we going to be scared? In that case, I'd look at it and say, you'd be excited, because if you own the customer and there's the right incentives or disincentives, and that nobody really gives a shit what it costs because it's such a small part of generally a much larger thing. That's another criteria we look. We like things that are a rounding error, because then there's no incentive to go and look at the profit. Like those are the kinds of things. And then founder problem fit, a few other psychometric.
I love that you used verb. That's kind of freaky, because I used to say right from the very early days, is that we've got to become a verb, because if we become a verb, we're nailing it. And obviously at the time it was Dockyard it.
Because I mean, obviously I'm a bit close to the situation, but I think it was just like, we'll just Ansarada that bit. And
the embedded in the workflow piece, I couldn't agree more with that. So again, like anyone who's listening, who's building B2B SaaS, and which you should be, if you're doing that, you should be listening to the Tribe guys, is if you don't intimately understand the workflow of your target customer, I think you better start figuring that out super quick, or you maybe stop, because if you can't find if you can't do you need to be the keystone in the archway? Ideally, but you don't have to be. But if you are a stone in the archway of their workflow and you're wedged in there and you don't get greedy and you stay in your lane, you'll be there for ages. And even when your technology may not be the latest, greatest thing, it still doesn't matter as long as it still is functional and is sorting the problem out. A la Aaron, you talking about the fax machine. Like, clearly fax machines aren't the latest, greatest thing, but does it still do the thing for food that it needs to do? And it's fine. Like, and also, by the way, it's reliable. And there's a lot in the physics of inertia in the human mind of, I know how it works. It doesn't take any of my bandwidth up because I can rely on it. And the inertia around that, I kind of, another thing that I figured out when in B2B SaaS is that the thing you're bringing to the table to sell to the customer better be 10 times, maybe 20 times better than the way they currently do it now for someone to raise their eyebrow, because of the switching pain is so high. Like, it has to be so face meltingly better.
It's so true. Like, one of the most forgotten competitors
But I didn't know
is
that,
just
Aaron.
laziness.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think founders see this as like, we have no competitors. Well, if competitors are choosing to do nothing, that is of itself
Apathy.
a friction point. Apathy.
Apathy is the big.
Yeah,
it's just
it's
the
really
biggest competitor.
surprising. Yeah. And again, like, these are things I've bumbled along the way and figured out. It's like, it's quite surprising how high humans in business, how the threshold is for putting up with dumb stuff. It's quite extraordinary. And then you think about the dumb stuff that you do every day, and you're like, wow, yeah, there's a million opportunities to optimize the way I was being a lawyer, or being, if you go as an investor, or whatever your thing is. I'm currently doing a renovation project on my house, and the opportunities for optimization that I see in the way that the construction industry works is pretty crazy. But I'm also scarred enough now to know that doesn't equal people doing it better, because there's a way to do it better. The embedded habits that you have are super hard to change. And so you actually, one of your competitors is, you guys are called Apathy. I guess I used to always talk about it as change management. Like, in some ways, we're a change management consultant, not a software company. But that insight came out of being more sophisticated with our selling and understanding what it took to sell. It became less and less about the actual product. I mean, of course, no one misquote me on that. Your product has to be good. Full stop. If your product's not good, stop, go away, go get a job.
And there's also a great, there's no shortage of products out there that aren't the best, but because of the go-to-market, because of the marketing, because of the sales, because of the branding, you see it all the time. Where, have a look at Xero now. It was cool back then, but it's actually a really old, clunky now, not intuitive. They keep pushing up the price, but they can do that because all of the other attributes exist.
Yeah.
But when they first started,
I mean, Salesforce for me is the ultimate example, right? Like, I won't say how much we used to spend on Salesforce, but it was a big bill. We wouldn't have been anywhere near their biggest customers. We would have been in their small bucket probably, but it was a big number for us in terms of a cost of doing business. And 100% of the humans that interfaced with Salesforce within our business would rather stab themselves in the face with a rusty spoon. Yet we paid for the privilege of everyone hating it. And it was so embedded in our workflow because you've got financial force as well. So it was your automated billing, and the idea of untangling that bowl of spaghetti is like, no, just keep paying them. And, it's a really good example, because there's way better CRMs out there. Yet Salesforce is the best CRM. Your product has to be good. It has to be obviously competent. It has to be stable, but your ability to penetrate the workflow and your distribution strategy. So the Xero example, I think that I understand their genius distribution strategy was the accountants. Like I use Xero for whenever I do some consulting work, I send an invoice through Xero now, but it's just my accountant uses it. And he's like, yeah, just put everything in Xero. Okay. Well, I'm not going to say to him, no, I'd like to use MYOB, right? I'm just not going to do that. Even if I loved MYOB, I'm not going to do that. He'd be like, go get a different accountant, mate.
Yeah.
And that's a bigger issue for me.
100%. The other one I put in that category is SAP, like one of the most cumbersome software platforms, but it is embedded and you can't shift it. But I'm also curious, you've had experience, Sydney, Brisbane, but also UK. Like, obviously a big focus for us is Aussie companies scaling to the UK and US. I'm keen to hear your experiences of doing business there, living there, lessons learnt, insights for founders.
So the first thing that came to mind is, so I'm a huge fan of the UK and Northern Europe as markets for Aussie B2B SaaS companies. There's always that allure of the United States. I never really had any success there. We had business there. We had an office in Chicago, both Dockyard and then into Ansarada they had a bit more of a footprint there than I originally did. I always found it difficult in the US. Yeah, sure. It was cool to go on trips and, we had a couple of customers in New York and we had some in San Francisco and we had them in, a few other places. But if your business is for some reason oriented appropriately to the US, then awesome, half your luck, right? Because there be a giant market there and they're just, you don't even have to be that good in terms of market penetration in the US to still drive revenues, which make your eyes water compared to the kind of market penetration and ownership of a market you have to have in Australia and New Zealand. That's just pure numbers, nothing complicated. However, I think that's the exception, not the rule. For me, I think the rule is if you're an Australian, New Zealand based B2B SaaS business, it's a wonderful place to start. It actually makes you pretty tough. I think you get pretty good feedback. Australians and Kiwis are pretty good with feedback. They're not as good as they think they are, actually. I think Australians culturally think that they're more robust with their business style than they actually are. It's my experience. I think the US that's the Premier League, and that probably explains what the amazing thing is that is the United States of America in all sorts of ways. So I would go to London. I think London's so obvious. Culturally, it's easier for you and your people. There's such deep established networks there that you can latch onto, which make landing easier. That ranges from Australian federal government kind of programs like the landing pads or whatever they call them these days, through to the sophisticated connectivity of organizations like yours, right? And your partners that you would have in those markets who introduce and get you going. And then, but the UK is a tough market. Benelux is probably my favorite. I love the Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands market. It's the Benelux region is super easy to get around because it's tiny. It's almost the same in terms of addressable market for B2B SaaS as the ANZ market in terms of the size of the economies all bundled together. I mean, an economist could slice and dice it different ways, but broadly, if you're listening to this, it's kind of like an ANZ market, again, in terms of size that you can address, but in these three tiny little countries bunched together. English is spoken ubiquitously through business, which obviously makes it super easy. It is a great place to toughen up because you wait till you start having some Dutch customers and then you'll realize how unrobust Australia and New Zealand business style is, which is great for product because you tighten up pretty quickly. Very sophisticated market, adoptive of technology. I mean, we all like the Dutchies and the Belgians in particular, they're always at the front edge of all sorts of science and technology. And it's a very easy market to address from London. You don't have to physically be there if you don't want to. I used to catch the train to Amsterdam, monthly. There's one that leaves at 6:37 from King's Cross, and a few hours later you're in Amsterdam Central, and you can get a lot of work done on the way. If I was advising any B2B SaaS business in Australia that's starting to get ready to spread the wings and fly, unless there was a compelling reason to look at any other market, whether it be Singapore, which is, again, I found a tough market to operate in. It's sort of sexy and you get drawn to it. But I think that's more to do with the sweaty nights and cold tiger beer. It's, the US we've discussed, London and Benelux, and there's so much to chew on there. You probably don't even have to do anything else. We found France really difficult, which I think is a pretty common story. I love going
that's
there.
surprising. It's difficult to do with the French. Wow.
It's really good to go there, though. Like, I recommend it as a holiday destination.
So there'll be a lot of listeners that are interested in the exit side. And I've got a couple of questions there. Was the goal always exit? And then two, what were some of the interesting parts of the transaction? Did it almost die somehow and there were difficult times? Like what are you able to share that could give some insights to the founder or founders and investors listening?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's a multi-chapter story, which I'll try and condense for you. Did it almost die? I think we only put the defib on it 6 times, and it got there, but I'll come to that. And because in the end we were publicly listed, there's a lot that's already in the public space, so I think I broadly can be pretty open about what happened. So was the goal always exit? I actually think my honest answer is I'm not sure I had a goal, which would be a terrible answer to that question if I was trying to, if this was an investment meeting. And I always get confused because I think for a while there, you're meant to say no. And that was the original good answer to an investor, which no, it's not about exit, because they want to know that you're going to be in there until you die. And then I think at some point that may have changed, but I just don't think I ever really thought about it. I had a urge to start a business. I always wanted to do it. I thought that I tripped over something really good. And to be honest, actually, I forgot to tell you, I tried to ignore the Dockyard for ages. I started all these other random businesses. I was trying to import some decking boards from Indonesia. I was doing all this random stuff. And actually what kept happening, the Dockyard kept getting people querying my website and people calling me and going, can I actually have this thing, please? And I'm like, I'm not that excited about that. I'm just I hated being a lawyer. And what I actually realized was that I was tripping over product market fit very early on because I was getting drawn towards it. And that's another thing. If people are grabbing you by the hair and asking you, can you please charge me for this thing? Then you probably should follow that rabbit down the rabbit hole. Now I've lost my train of thought. I didn't have a goal of exit. I had a goal of building, actually. I wanted to build something and I wanted people to be proud of what I built. That's another thought, actually. Sorry, I'm all over the shop with you guys, so you can probably edit me later. No,
it's good. We keep it organic.
What drives you, right? What are your, I never thought about stuff like culture, your own personal culture, your personal values. What are your values and what are your needs? So it turns out recognition is one of my needs. And we all have them. There's those cool values cards game that you can play. And no one's done that. Do it with your partner. Do it with your kid. Do it with your kid, definitely, because it will help you understand the sort of psychological and ego drivers that you have. And so that's why I wanted to build something. And I wanted people to be proud because I wanted people to recognize me as, oh yeah, he's a smart guy. He built something impressive. And that's a need of mine that I discovered along the way. And it also helps me understand my behavior now much better than I used to understand my behavior. But that's something also to do as a founder, is to understand what's driving you. What are your real needs, and actually go pretty deep on that, because it can help you understand how you're reacting to things and how you're behaving and what you actually need out of this to feel contented. But then at some point I honestly was like, oh, this actually seems to be working. Hey, I'm going to be rich. This is be awesome. Because it was an interesting move for me to start the business because I was a partner of a law firm that is highly profitable. Someone did say to me, and again, someone that was in the partnership, but I won't say who it was, said to me, Stu, you're one of the youngest partners in one of the best performing profit per equity partnerships in the country. And the average age of the partnership is pushing 70, in the equity partnership is pushing 70. All you need to do is breathe in, breathe out for the next couple of years, and you're on a golden highway. What are you doing? So the threshold for me to actually jump and start a tech business was enormous. And I look back at it and think I was just probably a bit nuts. And I didn't maybe really think about it that much.
Well, one of my questions was, who hurt you as a child? Because you had reached a point in your career where you're a partner at a law firm and you decide to leap and make this batshit journey. And we often see there's whether it's a chip on the shoulder, something they need to prove, but we see some of the best entrepreneurs are running towards something or running away from something, but a sense of having to prove themselves for some reason. Does any of that resonate for you?
Yeah, 100%. And I guess I'm now old enough and comfortable enough to sort of articulate those, I was about to call them failings because that was the first word that came to me, but are they failings or are they just facets? Because I think we all have them.
They're not
Not
failings. The way we look at it
I think
is
we're taught to think of them as failings.
Yeah, the way we look at it is they're ingredients. Now, in a cake, you can have some ingredients that make the cake taste like shit, but in another cake, they're actually the right type of thing.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not about trying to look at it through a lens of what's good, bad, or whatever else. It's more what is, and then once you understand what is how do you drop the negative ones? How do you keep the positive ones? And how do you keep moving forward?
Yeah. But I think what you're driving at, Aaron, is the word that actually keeps coming to mind for me is like, I was a bit of a psycho, right? Not in a going crazy kind of way, but like there's a bit of madness. And I actually think that's ultimately what kept driving, which kept the whole thing together, because I had to go so deep internally to keep it together at times. I had to work so hard, and it's beyond normal. It's kind of like, you see these sports stars doing 6-hour, 5-set matches. They just dig deep. There's another level. It's the 10th gear in an eight gear gearbox, right? Like you find 9 and then it turns out there's 10, but they don't exist on the plan. And so I don't know whether this is the forum or I'm ready for the to lie down and have the deep psychoanalysis as to why, but there's certainly something a bit there that I think I understand as an investor you'd want to be looking for, like the running away or running to something. I like that. I was really driven to produce something awesome and to be seen as a guy who, I would look up to, founders who've built businesses and were successful. I'm like, that's awesome. Like I'm super impressed by that. And, I wanted to have a crack at it. And ultimately what made me make the decision to not have the super golden highway, easy living. I'd have a second house at Whale Beach and spend too much time at the Land Rover servicing desk. That was all very easy. I was like, that sounds so boring. I was like, what, I'm going to do this for another 30 years? Like, it just didn't feel challenging. And I was like, I want something funner to do. And I think it was my wife that said to me, you're going to regret not having a crack at it, even if it fails. You're gonna always have this thing in your head. And that was like, okay, well, I'll go have a crack. And obviously I'm glad I did. But coming back to the actual question, which was around the exit, we then start a business. We've heard all about that. First 4 or 5 years, grinding, starting to get some action. We started to get up to some decent annual recurring revenue. I had a point where we then needed to raise money. And the reason we needed to raise money was because things were starting to work and we were like, let's pour a bit of fuel on this fire now. And up until that point, it'd been a little bit of sort of seed kind of angel-y money, but not much. It was very much bootstrapped mostly. And but it was time to sort of go, right, let's have a proper crack at this. And so, I did the usual, the VC thing. I looked at that and I had a bunch of meetings, got some term sheets out of that process. But I also had someone else who was, was sort of an influence and a mentor who was suggesting the public route. That's something that had worked well for them. And there was a little birdie on my shoulder. And I think it maybe helped that I was previously a corporate lawyer. So I didn't find the whole process of doing an IPO that scary. I'm like, it's just a transaction. But there was a little birdie on my shoulder saying, look, I'm building a pretty good business. It's solid, but it's not a rocket ship. This is not going to be front page of the AFR type stuff. This is not, I guess, Canberra and Atlassian are the names that get thrown out in the Australian tech scene. It's not one of those types of businesses. So it's just a good, solid business, but nothing more. And I kind of felt like I needed to bake optionality into my financing strategy. And I felt like by being publicly listed, we were just going to have more options available to us. There's obviously huge negatives to it, which everyone thought I was crazy doing it. The people talk about the compliance overheads and the regulation and all that kind of stuff. That stuff didn't really stress me because I'm like, let's just filling out forms and following some basic rules, like which you probably follow anyway because it's about not being naughty and doing business with a clean sheet. But so I ended up going down the route of doing an IPO on the ASX, which people think that's your exit. I'm like, it's far from an exit. If anything, I felt like I was more bound then to the business than ever before. But we did a little listing. So we were, I guess, what's called a micro cap, which is one under a small cap. We did a little listing on the ASX, which was a hoot. Actually, I mean, it was very stressful, but when we got it done, it was great, and got to ring the bell and got the pictures to prove it. I ripped the dongle off the bell, which is apparently
is that like 7 years bad luck or something?
I don't know. It really hurt my
well,
wrist.
Obviously not, clearly. Yeah.
But it whacked my wrist really badly, and it hurt at the time. But it was I then sufficiently anesthetized myself throughout the balance of the evening, so it didn't start hurting until 2 days later. But that was obviously fun. But it turned out to be the start of the exit journey, actually, which then took 5 years from the listing. Because we were then listed, we did have more options. It was much easier to then go raise follow-on capital if we needed to. And we also had second currency now, which was script, or for those people wondering what that is, it's you can pay for stuff with your own shares. You can offer your shares as a form of currency instead of dollars, or a mix of both. And that turned out to be, in the end, hugely validating. Now, obviously, me sitting there going, I want some optionality in my financing strategy sounds like, oh, wow, what a genius thought to have. It was just a thought, and it turned out to be super handy. So in hindsight, it then looks like you're a genius. It's just not the case. It was a punt. At best, most things, that decisions you make in the business are a punt, and the ones that go the right way, people go, oh, yeah, you're super smart. And the wrong ones that go the wrong way, the fingers start getting pointed. So this was just another example of that, I reckon. Now, the listing occurred. We were now a publicly listed company, which was fun. And then that was the 14th of February 2020, Valentine's Day. And then I think the lockdown in Australia happened on about the 20th of February or something around like that, like certainly pretty close to that. So then COVID was obviously bubbling away in the background, and then everyone went, oh, hang on a second, this is not just a fish market thing. And the country got shut down, and everyone knows that story. But obviously what happened is that the markets closed as well. So we kind of snuck through by the skin of our chinny chin. Again, just pure luck, timing, whatever. And that then ended up opening the opportunity to then transact with Ansarada as well, because they were also doing a capital raise. They were in the market themselves, completely separate to us. Obviously, we knew about them.
But and the only reason they were listed or they were unlisted?
No. Ansarada was private. Yeah.
Yeah, they were private. You were a small cap. They were private. You knew about them, and yep. Okay.
That's right. And then this is where, I guess, as a founder, keep your eyes open. I said 56 minutes ago in this podcast that there's heaps of data rooms. I wasn't interested in being a data room. I was actually an Ansarada customer when I was a lawyer. And the reason I wasn't interested in being a data room is not because I had anything against data room. It's just I thought that problem was solved. There was heaps of players. Why would I wade into that very busy pool? I've got a different problem to solve. But what ended up happening, actually, this comes back to, Aaron, one of the questions you were asking about the selling piece. What ended up happening is when we were going in to sell, people were like, yeah, this is really cool what you guys are doing. That's going to be so helpful. But we also need to, need a data room. Yeah. That's where's the data room. So we then were like, go get a data room. I don't care about the data room. Like, we're not solving the data room problem. Go get a data room. But the friction that we didn't anticipate was that the lawyer and the investment banker, and Don, you were saying how they have that disproportionate influence over the technologies selected on a transaction, which is 100% true. They'd be like, oh, yeah, but I don't want to have to go to the family office client and say, oh, you need to pay this much for a data room, and also want you to pay for this automation workflow tool as well. We actually didn't anticipate that was just going to be too much of a headache for them. And they'd just be like, well, out of the two, we need the data room more, because we can still live with doing stuff dumb, but we can't live without the data room because we really need the data room. And so we kept bumping into this problem. And I'm like, oh, this is so annoying. So eventually we were like, we'll just build a data room. And so we did. Again, like, I don't think it's information that's unhelpful to be out there now. Literally inside the dockyard, it was called Project Ansarada, was to build a data room. We just called it that because we're like, Ansarada was the best data room on the market. We'll call it Project Ansarada because let's build a data room as good as Ansarada. So it was a compliment to Sam and Rachel and the rest of the team there, Andrew, and what they had built. And so we built our own data room, and we built something pretty quickly. I think 12, 13 weeks, we put it together, a minimum viable data room. And it didn't have the depth of what the Ansarada product had, but it was like we went from zero to like a mid-level offer pretty quickly. And we just threw it into there as a feature. And that's then what started this whole new direction for us, because then people were like, oh, this is cool, because now I can use your data room and I get the benefit of the embedded workflow tools and automation. That was the moment that things started to change, because we then realized we were in the data room and workflow automation game. And I never thought we were. So I reckon it would have been helpful to me to figure that out a little bit earlier. So this is the whole keep your eyes open as to what's happening around you. And I didn't know because I wasn't asking the right questions and I didn't think deeply enough about the workflow of my customer. And I hadn't stopped to think. And also keep in mind, I used to be that customer and I hadn't even stopped to think myself, would I go into bat for the Dockyard when I need to already talk to my customer about spending $5,000 or $10,000 on the data room, which is already an annoying conversation to have, but I will have it. But will I then layer on top of that a secondary sentence or conversation about also this Dockyard thing? Path of least resistance is get the data room sorted, stuff the Dockyard conversation, right? And now knowing that, I love talking to founders and really pushing them on the workflow of their client to really figure out where and how they need to sell. And again, that I'm not pretending I was born with that information. That took me years of doing stupid stuff to figure out. So then COVID hit. A conversation was brokered with me, with the Ansarada guys, who, were looking to do some financing of their own. Because we're publicly listed, we were able to still access capital in the market, which, notwithstanding the fact that they call it the window was closed. That meant it was like no one else was going to go get listed, or sort of people were flighty. And I guess those with a finance background would understand all that. So we were able to then bring together, and Ansarada solved the problem for me, which was they brought instant scale, because those guys were already in business for probably 13 years at that point-ish. They built great business. They had capability and brand presence much broader than my business had. My business was able to bring some structural solutions to their business. And so for me, it was bringing together, and very rare actually in M&A, where actually there was a problem I couldn't solve that they could, and there was a problem was very difficult for them to solve, which I could relatively easily. And those things obviously just met at the same moment on George Street, and we brought them together.
And how do you negotiate the relative swaps and the val and the was that easy and you all just had alignment? Did it get tricky?
No, it was not easy. It was very tricky, and it was hands down the highest friction piece, which is, I guess, no surprise. There's a lot of background complexity with cap tables, probably as well. And, your cap table is in some ways just an Excel spreadsheet with numbers and names, but those names also have personalities and egos and desires, which vary across the spectrum of human behavior. And so, it was sort of wrestling all of that together as well on all sides. So it was hugely complicated, difficult, and it was a credit particularly to the chairs on both sides of the transaction, who, did what chairs do, right? They make it work. They bring it together. They rub the shoulders. They facilitate, and both of the chairs in this instance on this transaction, should be credited hugely with facilitating and helping things get done, which sometimes looked like they were just coming in at 90 degrees and they were making them work. So the transaction got done. The technicality of it was that the Dockyard acquired the Ansarada business, and we paid for it in scrip. We also did, in conjunction with that, we did a pretty decent, actually pretty big capital raise, and that capital raise, cleaned up some cap table stuff and made, unhappy people happy, and other happy people that were happy to stay even happier, and all that kind of stuff. Left a good amount of money in the bank as well in terms of the float. And we were also able to then combine, in my view, which was the best data room product on the market, with the emerging understanding of the need for the solution that we had brought to market, which was around workflow and project management on a deal and bring them together. That obviously then involved afterwards a technical integration and rebuilds and bringing all that stuff together. That wasn't as smooth as I think probably thought it would be, but probably never is.
And for those that chose to exit at that point and didn't hold out for the ultimate exit, roughly what was the upside multiple on that first one versus the final exit?
I don't think, because a lot of the issues were not on my cap table, so I didn't have as intimate an understanding of it. But and also,
I always find it interesting. Some people they jettison early and only to miss the upside in most venture stuff is in the last couple of years. Often,
yeah. So zero doubt that if you hadn't have dropped off the bus at that point, you would have had a better outcome had you stayed on the bus. 100%, that's the case. There's zero doubt there. But of course, this is the thing, obviously their business was much older than mine. So people had been on their cap table for longer, and, people get fatigued with being on a cap table, and sometimes the value of taking your money and whatever return you get for that and redeploying it elsewhere. Because this is the reality, right? Far be it for me to go into bat for investors, but they're people too. They have, hearts and feelings, and, and get
needs.
Needs as well. So you can understand how probably that happened for some people. And also, there were some institutional investors on that cap table who, they're more clinical, I guess, and were probably seeing other opportunities that they wanted to redeploy into. But now the business was together. I was on the board with Sam, the CEO of Ansarada, and now Ansarada Group, because we renamed it Ansarada Group to maintain the benefit of the brand that they had built. And that was a sad little moment for me, actually, which I probably hadn't really thought about too much. It's a bit early for a gin and tonic, but
when your brand your brand disappears.
Yeah, and I mean, it was 100% the correct decision. Like there was, from a logical perspective, there wasn't even a discussion to be had. The Ansarada brand was sufficiently superior in all aspects to the one that I was building, just because we hadn't been on the road as long. But yeah, it was a sad little moment, because it was a bit like, oh, that was, and I was part of a bigger thing, which was 100% correct. And I never once looked back and went, oh, I would have done it any other way. I think that's nice to have that feeling. But I think all the right decisions, the big ones that went turned out to be the right decisions. But there was certainly a degree of a loss of ownership for me personally once we were together in a bigger business. So I was still on the board. Sam correctly stayed as the CEO of the broader group. He had much deeper operational experience in running hundreds of staff members as opposed to 40 like me. So that was definitely correct as well. And I took over revenue. I was chief revenue officer. That was the right spot for me, and I focused heavily on that. And we did the next 3 years, we did exactly what the fairy tale should have been, which was we hit our straps. And that was a mix of us actually hitting our straps and working really hard. And of course, the wind blows in the right direction. So, the markets went the right way for us. There was more deal flow, and more deal flow equals more buying of data rooms and using of automation tools. And so those two things, came together in a nice confluence for us. And, we did really well. We posted good numbers for the next 3 financial years. And that solves a lot of problems.
Revenue cures all ills.
Yes. Yeah. And also we operationally did very well in terms of tightening the belt through the process of the transaction. There was some trimming done on the on the inbound side, which is the Ansarada side, which again was all correct and appropriate and didn't put the business in danger in terms of being able to execute, but certainly trimmed up the margins nicely. So we were doing well. We were growing revenue at the top line. We'd become much more efficient on the bottom line. We were making money, which is, how old school's that? Business is actually just putting profit into the bank account grows.
That's that word. It's probably not known nowadays.
And did the acquirer come knocking at your door, or did you proactively go out?
No, they came and talked to us, and as everyone will know who bothered to look into it, if you had that weird need, it was, the Datasite was probably number 2 out of the 3. So Ansarada 3, Datasite 2, and Intralinks 1. And I talk about, when I say 1, 2, and 3, I mean in market share. That's not a comment on quality of products and people and that stuff, just pure market share. And the Datasite guys a couple of years back, so it must have been around 21, 22. I can't remember. I wasn't involved, but someone could look it up if they needed to, were acquired by CapVest. So the European PE, but they were acquired actually out of the US operation for CapVest. When I saw that, to be honest, it was the first time that I deep down, but I never verbalized it, not even at my own dining table. It was the first time I sort of got a sniff of, hang on a second, something could happen here, because now that there's PE in the space. Then that accelerated in my mind because CapVest then acquired Firmex, which I roughly describe as, they were the Ansarada of Canada. And I thought, oh, hang on a second, here we go. There's someone's got a roll-up strategy on mind. And it was really difficult for Intralinks and Datasite to compete with Ansarada in Australia and New Zealand. Obviously, like, we were very strong there. Benelux, we did really, really well. Apropos what we spoke about before, we did okay in the UK. Like, certainly it's a big enough market, and doing okay was good. And the US, we weren't a worry to them at all. But we certainly, and Southern Africa, actually. So we had a very strong foothold in Southern Africa, which is, there's a lot of deal flow down there, actually. So basically all deal flow from Africa happens in Johannesburg and Cape Town. I mean, 100% true, but broadly, most of it. So we had some really nice markets, which were very profitable and were good to own. And I mean, I've never been told this because, in some ways it's none of my business, but I can probably assume pretty accurately that eventually the private equity owners said, well, why don't we just go buy those markets? And they approached us. Now, once you're publicly listed, people probably don't really think about it until someone points it out. And then it's dead obvious. You're for sale every day, and your price is digitally pinned on the board.
Yeah, that's a fair call. All you got to do is pay a premium, and you're done.
Yeah, and so then there was the usual antics: offer, not enough; second offer, not enough. Now, that all sounds like super simple, but actually it's pretty complicated in the public space because the board needs to. It's hard for Sam and I as executives on the board who are also decent shareholders. You've got to separate all of that and put it in a box.
Yeah, you got to act in the best interest of the company.
Yeah, and it gets very difficult because you're just a human, and those streams all get pretty milky. But of course you do it because you're a professional. And again, that's where chairs and non-executive directors and independent directors are super critical. And we had great ones, and that really helped us. They guided us, particularly our chair, Peter, guided us wonderfully through the whole process. It was always a proper, honest assessment of the offer. Is that best for all key stakeholders? Obviously, shareholders is one of the key stakeholders, but not 100% of the stakeholder matrix. And and we also had great advisors as well. So particularly the bankers to help us understand comps in the market and all that kind of stuff. So so I think there was one, then there was two, and then everything went quiet, and then I thought, we've missed the opportunity. I better just keep my head down and keep working. And so it was the 22nd of December, 2023, I think. Only reason I remember is that I'd taken the Friday off work to go to Vienna for the weekend with my family to go to the Christmas markets and drink warm red wine, Glühwein. And got a WhatsApp from the chairman saying, we need to jump on the board, on an emergency board call or something along those lines. And the Christmas party for the Australian business has only been the day before. So I actually thought, oh no, what's happened to the Christmas party? It's literally what I thought.
What's happened?
And then we get on there and straight away they get to the point and said, look, here's the new offer. And it was $2.50 a share, full cash offer. That's the deal that eventually got done, which is why I was happy to say the number. And then the deal started. They promised that they'd do the deal in 8 weeks. We thought, great. The deal ended up taking almost 12 months. There was an ACCC inquiry in the middle of it where the ACCC decided for some reason to not worry about, I don't know, Optus and Telstra and Coles and Woolies and all of these other duopolies that exist in the Australian market, which affect consumers, and concern themselves deeply.
Data rooms for lawyers is where our energy must go.
Which is, the poor old investment bankers and their needs around vendor selection in the highly niche area of data rooms in the Australian market. I mean, mind-boggling as to why taxpayers' money is wasted on these sorts of things. But I guess that's a conversation definitely for gin and tonic and not being recorded.
It's nice to be wanted.
I can see the town hall meeting, like, who's thinking of the investment bankers?
Yes, but it is worth me, obviously very sarcastically articulating this, because I think it needs to be said, like you need to call out this kind of BS, because it is a huge inhibitor on innovation in Australia, and it's a huge inhibitor on founders and early stage investors who back those founders getting outcomes. And if the Australian regulatory environment is going to be so parochial, they'll turn around and wonder why people just like me and chaps just like you spend their money and efforts in other markets. And they'll wonder why we have a backwards innovation economy, right? Like, obviously, I got into some dark places about this triple C thing, and I'm drawing some big long bows from that. But I think these things link, and like this is a policy level issue conversation for another day. But suffice to say, we survived and came out the other side. It looked really bad. They did a market call around, and then they do a formal paper, and then that's a point where you can then get a clear, but we didn't. Then they went to a full market investigation. And like our lawyers at that point were just like, I'm sorry, we can't even explain to you why this is happening. People were like going, who did what to the commissioner's kids? Like, joking, obviously, like that was all done in jest, but you know what I mean? Like this sort of like, how is this even possible? But long story short, we got the green lights. We had to keep extending the scheme of arrangement to bring the businesses together. It's all in the public space. We're still trading at this point. So you've still got ongoing compliance and ASX rules requirements. So every time anything happens, you're like, do we need to tell the market or do we not need to tell the market? It was super stressful and a pretty interesting experience. But suffice to say, we got it done, and then we completed, and that was July 2020, August 2024. So actually, you know what, that's it was almost more like 9 months in gestation of a human. So we got it done. And then, like I said, because it was an all cash offer and it was being taken into the broader PE outfit around the other two data room businesses, it was an opportunity for me as an executive to be no longer required, which was very fine by me. And I stepped away from the business. So yeah, that was how it happened. It was
What a journey.
after I told that full story, and even just sort of telling it out loud, it's like, oh God, it was actually more traumatic than I.
Yes. Well, that's also a topic for a gin and tonic conversation. But you said something in there that was quite nice, which was in hindsight, you wouldn't change any of the key decisions. But what would you say to a founder that's talking about listing? What would you say to them today after your experience?
See, it's a tough. I hate it when people ask me that question, because it's hard for me to say be very cautious about it, because that's sort of the old lawyer brain in me that's still there. It's like, oh, that's a very risky strategy where you would do that. And I'm like, well, I went and did it and it worked out brilliantly for me. So it's hard to say not go and do it. But I would say be very clear about the reasons you're doing it, and that if the reasons for being listed need to be realistically an upside that you can achieve. I think, but I definitely would not say no out of hand, which probably already puts me in the minority, because I think most people would say no out of hand. I think the ASX is an exceptionally unique market that we have because of its depth of liquidity, because of the genius. One of the best pieces of public policy that's ever occurred anywhere in Western democracies is Australia's superannuation scheme. And that has provided an insane level of liquidity in an otherwise pretty small set of boards known as the ASX. And it provides an financing option for startups, which doesn't really exist in many other places. But most people would say no out of hand because it's big, it's scary, it's compliance, it's listed, you have to report, you have to tell people stuff. I'm not a no out of hand kind of a person. But I don't know whether I think we need better vehicles than just people continuing to go it alone. Like I think there's probably some smarter ways that ASX can be leveraged for the Australian tech scene. But it comes with its challenges, that's for sure. But equally, it provides liquidity for early investors as well, right? Like people have the option to then make their own decisions. I will never forget the day that our share price, because what normally happens, I think, I'm not a super finance analyst, but things list, and typically there's a little burst. So you pop up and then you pop down again, and then it's a game of trying to get back up to that first starting point. And we sort of followed that. And I remember when we popped back above our initial listing price, that was such a good day for me. And the reason it was a good day is I knew every single investor who went in really early, who stayed the whole time. They now had public shares in the Dockyard. They now, if they decided to sell today, they're going to make money. And I felt like I had discharged my duty. Like I felt
you'd done your job.
Now it's on them. Yeah, now it's on them. If it goes to nothing, they had their chance to get out. That's not my responsibility anymore. But up until that day, I carried the weight of their money so heavily because, well, I think because you should. It's scary. It's horrible having that sense of obligation, but it's also helpful because it drives you to perform, to get those outcomes for those people, that because money's hard to earn. And I have the utmost respect for a single dollar invested, because that dollar created took $2 to create to get $1. And then that $1 you're given to me out of all the things you could do with that dollar. And you've got lots of things you could do with that dollar. You're giving it to me. You know, that's a big deal. And I think if you're a founder and you're not taking money super seriously, don't take money, because that's not the right mindset to have.
Yeah, totally agree with you.
I think that's speaking of mindset. Through all of this, what are just some of your personal routines? Like, how do you handle stress? How do you keep focus? How do you move forward given this whole journey that we've described here? Are there any little things that you do?
Oh, heaps, actually. And I, again, had to construct them out of necessity along the way to help me get through. It's a bit of a throwaway line for comedy purposes, but it's not probably completely wrong. Is that it helps to demonize some people every now and then, create some enemies. I think actually, was it one of the basketball players?
Everyone needs a nemesis. I've got a few.
But sometimes
one's on this call.
You demonize them. And they having creating a nemesis in your mind that's probably making them worse than they actually are in reality is helpful, because it can really drive you to be like, I'm gonna get this sorted. Fitness, it sounds a bit passé because everyone would say it, but going to the gym routinely, like I give myself a little more of a break these days. But 5 o'clock, get up, go to the gym. Now the thing is, I will make the point. I hate all the bollocks on LinkedIn about 4:30 a.m., 2 hours gym, cold plunge, creatine in the eyeball. I don't subscribe to all of that bullshit, right? I think it sets an unhealthy...
eyeball. I thought it was the anus. Fuck.
Yeah, that's different. But
that's where I've been going wrong.
Maybe you're on a different program. The algorithm's sending you different things in your feed. All of that stuff is really unhealthy, because it's nearly always probably said by either an AI agent these days anyway, so they live in a human that does these things, but be with people that don't do these things. It's just creating a mythology that isn't true, and it's therefore it preys on people's insecurities and think, if I'm not doing this stuff, I'm not hardcore, I'm not this, I'm not going hard enough. Hard work is, I believe, a value that everyone should have. But it's not going to be the whole thing, right? Like, and also there's no one fits all thing. Like, it's to the individual, but it's also to the circumstance that individual is going through. Sometimes I just had to hard work and brute force stuff, and it was the only way to get through. Other times I didn't have to work that hard at all, because, the strategies were really exceptional, and it meant that you didn't have to work as hard because you're working smarter. And that's all on the one journey, right? And it's a constant give and flow. But to come back to it, for me, getting up early and hitting the gym became something as a savior. I could put the music on loud. No one was ever in the gym at that time, so I was like a madman. If you ever saw me on CCTV, you'd be like, that guy is genuinely nuts. I'd have conversations with people that I needed to have conversations with people that had conversations with, there's something about, for me, in the gym, just smashing the gym out, and it was a way to get out anger, frustration, anxiety, and also not bring that back to the breakfast table where your family is. That was super important to me. And I started to get better at being really strict around my time. And that was about then developing a culture of solution mindset within the business, because you always become the default. Oh, that's not working. Hey, Stu, how does this work? Or how do we fix this? And so becoming more defensive about my time was really important as well, particularly into the evenings. Stuff like, I even still do it now. Like, I get to a point where I'm like, it's in the evening, it's dinner time. I put my phone on airline mode, and that's it. I'm done. There's no more possibility of inbound. Now, I will say, again, that sounds like, oh, that's a nice luxury. And someone there who's just in the early days of their business is like, yeah, but I'm also the support call guy. I was also the support call guy. And I know Sam, who obviously was my colleague at Ansarada, he started that business with Rachel and Andrew. You know, he tells stories of 2 a.m. He used to be able to answer the phone, Ansarada help desk, like in the very early days of the business, right? Like, okay, so you don't, obviously as the business grows and you put more structure around it and you're running a better program, you can start to do things like that. But also, again, I'm not going to try and pretend like that was the case the whole time. I would come and go with my ability to stay on top of the stress. But if I had to pinpoint one thing, it was definitely my fitness. I found that and being conscious of like alcohol consumption as well. And again, don't always get that right. But, sort of if I was coming into a particularly stressful time, I got better at going, do you know what, I'm struggling here. This is really stressful. Maybe a few weeks or a month off the sauce and smash the gym a bit more would just give me that extra 0.5% of edge that I need to survive the next 2 months. And so I think being a bit more conscious of your capabilities and trying to help yourself get that extra little, again, that's that 9th gear in an 8-gear gearbox, right? Like you can only find it by changing something pretty substantial. So, and I think I've always struggled with the sort of binary nature of on and off. Like, my dad used to always be like, you've got to switch. You're literally on or you're off. And I've never really thought too much about it. But when I look back and think about the journey, you're on so much. And you kind of need to be, otherwise, because no one else is going to do it. But I remember we had a holiday at one point, which was kind of rare. And we just like 2-hour flight over to Vanuatu. And we got there and I just started feeling really sick. And I'd been smashing it. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to go lie down. And I never have a nap. And it was like, midday or something. And my wife and son had just went off to the pool. And I laid down on the bed and I fell asleep. And I woke up and it was like 10 o'clock the next morning. And my wife and son had come back. They'd had lunch. They'd come back. They'd had dinner. They'd come back. They went to bed. They'd got up. They went out for breakfast. And I just woke up and I just really went, oh. And I actually, because the sun was up when I went to sleep and the sun was up when I woke up, I thought I'd had a half-hour nap. So I think understanding that sometimes
the body knows
you need
the score is a great book.
Yeah, that's a good.
It's sometimes it shuts down on you.
Yeah, so kind of, I would not say that I ever got that right very well in terms of running hard to try and keep it going and relaxing. But I think being more conscious of that for, my next business, I'll be much more conscious of it as well. But definitely fitness was a big one.
I can relate to so much of that, and definitely the physical fitness. But the moments where you do switch off and then the body catches up and goes into recovery mode.
You can have everything you want, just not at the same time. That's the...
I think of it as seasonality.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's a bit like some founders that I engage with that have gone through and had the success, and they now talk about the value of sleep, and they wish they had understood the value of sleep. Well, actually, when you've got a newborn, which is often a startup company, tough shit. That's the reality. Now, when you grow up and the child grows up and it starts sleeping through the night and it gets a little bit more controlled, again, the same with the business, you can then start to do things you couldn't do before, but it's about getting those sequences right in the life cycle. That's what you've done. And then hopefully you end up getting the fruits of that labor, which we are so pleased for you that you've been able to do that. Not everybody is able to, but I look back at, you used luck a few times in there, and maybe, like, I always believe people should have some luck, but number one rule is don't get dead, as Aaron often says.
Yeah.
And you've just got to be in it. And if you're in it long enough, doing the right things in the right manner, the universe tends to give you a bit of a reward. But if you're in the wrong market with the right product,
I so agree with that. And I think that persistence and resilience is so super key. I totally agree with that, Don. Like I plus one that hugely.
Well, I know a good conversation when time has flown. I've really enjoyed the combo, and I think
combo.
Aaron, I think we need a part 2 because
there's
a part 2 and also a gin and tonic catch up.
Yeah, people outside, especially parts of the media, they ridicule some of the lengths founders go to and some of the things that they don't understand, but building these things is a significant human endeavor that takes a lot of energy. It saps a lot of energy from the founders, from the family, from those around. It's such a group effort. And I really love the lessons that you've shared.
Yeah, 100%. And like it'd be remiss of me not to shout out, particularly for me. And I know most founders will say this that have gone through the journey. My partner was my wife, Sarah, who made huge sacrifices to enable me the, I guess, freedom, is that the right word? The freedom to run after this.
No, it is the freedom. Without them, from a structural point of view, if you didn't have them in the corner,
possible.
Not possible.
Yeah, hugely. I mean, I don't think I mentioned, because I think our son was about 9 or 10 months old when I decided to start the business as well, because why not layer that other issue in? But but I mean, certainly, in my case, my wife is very successful executively, but we kept moving and kept changing things, which means that she was then moving firms, moving businesses, new country, start again with network and all these sorts of things. And there's genuine and real cost to that, and you also that as well yourself. So that's also, you put that in the same bucket as I've taken money off people and I need to make sure they get it back plus something. I'm like, I better make sure this works, because there's real costs that have been incurred on a different ledger as well within the family, and the outcome is for them, not for me. It's certainly true.
Totally get it.
Yeah,
totally get it.
Very true.
Well, this has been an awesome combo. I look forward to the follow up. Really appreciate the insights and the time you've spent for the audience and our portfolio as well, and look forward to catching up again.
Yeah, I can't wait to do this pig wrestling at your next tribe event.
And if people want to get in
contact, along to an offsite.
Yeah, definitely. If people want to get in contact, what's the best way? LinkedIn or?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best way to find me. And if you're unable to do that, then you probably don't deserve to find me.
Yes, you can. That's it. You got to have a threshold.
This is a B2B SaaS podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're not on LinkedIn, there's point number 1 on your go-to-market strategy review. Even though LinkedIn is becoming a cesspool, I still think it's such an important channel and a valuable channel, and a channel that's not just about, like Aaron, you're saying that, mass outbound. Like, it's still a place to connect with people. Professionals are there. And if you're in B2B, you're selling to professionals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks, chaps.
Awesome.
No, thank you, Stuart.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Look forward to the next.
No worries. I'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
Cheers.
Bye.